Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of Storytime with Jamin. This time we're in the backyard. It's not a blizzard anymore. It's actually kind of feels like spring. We're having a nice bonfire. And I want to tell you a story about the time that our friend, Greg Doctolero, got stabbed through his hand by our mandolin player, Kirk Scapole. So we went to play a festival, we being Larry and his Flask. We went to play a festival with a bunch of other Oregon bands, and it was a PBR festival, and so there was a lot of free beer. Believe it or not, we consumed probably half of the free beer available to the entire crew. And it was a great show. We had a lot of fun. There was a bunch of bands that played, and later on in the evening we were leaving. And of course, whoever was driving, I think it was Randy, was sober. But the rest of us were good and lively, so to speak. Me, on the other hand, I was sleepy. So I decided I was going to go sleep on the front bench seat of the van. And everybody else was in party mode. So I shut my eyes and I laid down, as I often tried to do when things were about to get out of control. I tried to just block it out, go to sleep. So I hear everybody hollering and screaming, and they want to jump out of the van and steal some plastic PBR flags that are lining the driveway to the festival, okay? You know, those type that are like a triangle and they say whatever logo on them. So Kirk and Greg Doctolero and probably Dal, a couple other people jumped out of the car, out of the van, and cut a string of them, wadded it up, and handed it to somebody in the van. By this time, I was kind of awake. And we were still on the property of the festival, you know, we hadn't even left yet. And so they got some of them, and they decided that's not enough. We need more. What we're going to do with these fucking things, nobody knows, but we need them. In the heat of the moment, anyway. So then they bail out again. Kirk has his brand new, very sharp knife that his girlfriend, Kathleen, had just given him. And he was stoked to use it, so he cut another length of them. And Greg Doctolero was now inside the van. And he put his hand out to, in his mind, and it, by the way, it was completely pitch black at this time. It was dark, probably like 10 at night or something. So Doctolero thought he was reaching out to grab the flags that Kirk was going to hand him. However, that's not what Kirk thought. Kirk didn't see Greg reach out. Kirk had his sharp knife in his hand and for some reason, went to jump into the van with his knife like this. And so the two things, Greg's hand and Kirk's knife, collided. And of course, that brand new knife went right through his hand and came right back out. And at the moment, at that time, Greg didn't, it hurt, I think, but he didn't realize what had happened. And it was dark, like I said. So everybody got in, and Greg is fairly dark-skinned, and I heard him go something like we were driving for a bit, we got out of the driveway, and everybody got in, and I heard him say something like, oh, fuck. And somebody turned on one of the lights in the van, and he held up his hand, and it was just covered in blood, and his lap was covered in blood. And he held it out like this, and you could see through it. When he went like that, you could see a gap in the webbing between his finger and his thumb. And he was white, like the color of paper. And he was looking through his hand. And he started to look like he was passing out. So at that point, I was fully awake, and we jumped into action mode. And I think super glue and duct tape is usually the go-to for those scenarios, and glue it up real fast. But I think at that time we just had like probably a t-shirt and some duct tape, and we got it together enough that he didn't lose enough blood to pass out. So we got him somewhat patched up, and I think he wound up going to the hospital the next day, or perhaps the ER later that night. But we got out of there, and he didn't pass out, and and he survived. And then later on, I love that all these stories are like, oh yeah, and the person I'm telling you about also survived, but that's a plus. So Greg, I'm glad you survived too. Dal, Greg, I guess each week I'll just tell a new story about one of my bandmates or friends almost perishing in some completely avoidable scenario, apparently. So the moral of the story is this. Later on, Willie T. Taylor, who, if you guys haven't heard of Willie T., you probably have, but if you haven't, look him up right now. He's an amazing musician, songwriter. He's been in a few bands, but his solo stuff is phenomenal. Later on, he dropped a wisdom bomb on us all, and he said that he asked Kirk, well, did Kathleen gave you the knife, right? Yeah. Did she cut herself with it first? Because apparently it's old folk magic or some shit that if you gift someone a knife, you have to cut yourself, because the knife is going to seek blood. So it's going to find the blood one way or the other. So you better cut yourself and then give the knife away. It sounds completely logical and sanitary to me, but she did not do that. So if you're going to give somebody a knife, you have to cut yourself. Of course, the knife was looking for blood, and it found Greg Dodgelero in the middle of the night and went right through his hand. So I hope you enjoyed a nice fiery trip down memory lane with me, Jamin Marshall. If you like what you hear and see, please hit that subscribe button and the thumbs up button. I love doing these stories, even though it's all about mayhem and craziness. Next week, I'll try to think of one that is just really pleasant and uplifting and not dangerous, but I don't know, what's the fun in that, Bebop? Anyway, have a wonderful evening, everyone. Jamin out.